Good evening, everybody. My name's Binita Kane. I'm the co-founder of South Asian Heritage Month, and welcome to our event this evening, which is all about resolving conflicts in identity and belonging, having a dual heritage. How do we feel about that? How do we square that? We're live streaming on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Please do use the comment section to put comments for us in the chat, comments, questions. We will get to those at the end. We're thinking the event will be around 45 minutes, but if it needs to go on longer or needs to be shorter, we can do that too. And thanks so much for joining us. I'm delighted to be joined by Neeraj and Fatima, who will introduce themselves shortly, but I just thought I would tell you a little bit about how this event came to be. And it all started when Neeraj sent an email to the South Asian Heritage Month team sharing a video that he had done for his organisation as part of a programme called Empower, which was a learning module about equality and diversity. And I just watched this video and there were so many things in it that resonated with me. So Neeraj was just telling his story, that I said, oh, let's have a chat, because I don't think I'd ever really discussed these sorts of issues with anyone before. And then that chat led to, let's do an event. And then Neeraj said, I know this amazing lady called Fatima Khan-Shah, who is a real campaigner and, you know, leads the Racial Equality Network and has got some really interesting things to share. And here we are. And about 5 minutes ago, Neeraj said to me, why the hell did I send that email? So I think they're both massively regretting it now, but I'm enormously grateful to them for joining us this evening to talk about this really interesting topic, and I hope it's going to be a good discussion. So just over to you both briefly, just to introduce yourselves, and then I'll hand over to you, Neeraj, to go through your story. So Neeraj, do you want to go first?
Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Neeraj Bhasin. I'm by day a consultant vascular surgeon for the Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust, and also work in a medical leadership role for the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts.
And Fatima.
So my name's Fatima Khan-Shah. I wear many hats. One of them is sort of a public carer champion. My day job is to lead a number of transformation programs across a consortium of health and care organisations. But I'm just a passionate advocate of inequality, and Neeraj and I met because I convene a network of networks focusing on supporting race equality in West Yorkshire and Harrogate.
Fantastic, thank you both. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Neeraj. So he's going to go through some slides which kind of reflect the story I saw in that original video. So let me just get those slides up. Yeah, I can see those on the screen. Neeraj, are you okay?
Yeah,
can you see
I'm ready
those?
to go if you could see
Lovely.
them.
Yeah, I can see them off. So hand over to you now.
Thank you. So I feel really privileged to be able to share my story as part of this discussion around identity and belonging. And as it is my story, it's my feelings and my perceptions. I wouldn't presume to speak on everyone else's behalf, as I completely understand that all our stories are individual, shaped by our ethnicity, gender, age, socioeconomic background. But with this, what I hope to do is, number one, create allies, but most importantly, help people feel seen, help us build a shared confidence, allow us to be proud of our experiences, and empower us to see our diversity as a strength, and importantly, help those who come after us. I would describe my identity and belonging as neither here nor there, but all good. And I'll explain that. So I'm going to start with my dad. My dad came to England in 1966, having qualified as a doctor. He came with £3 in his pocket and a 20 kilogram suitcase, which were the rules then. Dad came with the aspirations of being a consultant orthopaedic surgeon and playing cricket. He was a wicketkeeper and opening batsman. But unfortunately, due to the experiences he had, mainly based around his ethnicity, he gave up on both his career aspiration and his main hobby. Dad was soon followed by Mum, who has a degree in English. And absolutely can sound like the Queen on the telephone. When Dad was at work, Mum used to ring round places to find accommodation for them. And she had the unfortunate experience of turning up at a house that she'd rung. The person opened the door and then basically looked at her and said, "Oh, you didn't sound like one of them on the telephone," and then just shut the door in her face. I grew up as one of three and I was very happy. I felt cared for and loved. And I grew up in Huddersfield, and this was the first time there was a joke made to me that I understood was about my ethnicity. The stereotype of Asians at that point was that they would come into England, open a corner shop and live above it. And the joke was that I was a posh Indian because I didn't live above a corner shop, but I lived above a surgery. My Dadaji and Dadiji came to live with us for periods of time, and I used to wake up to the sound of the pressure cooker and the smell of fresh parathas. But that concerned me because I knew when I woke up and smelt those smells that my coat was hanging by the kitchen on a peg. And I was worried about when I got on the school bus, the smell that would bring and give off and how that would make me perceived amongst my peers. I grew up pretty badly dressed, as you can see. I didn't have a pair of jeans until I was 16. And as a family, we grew up eating Indian food, celebrating Indian ceremonies, and socializing with Indian friends. I had 2 English films on VHS, one being The Sound of Music and the other being Star Wars. And so pretty much to this day, I can sing every lyric of the songs on Sound of Music, and I get a bit over emotional when I see an X-Wing. One of Dad's other aspirations was to own a maroon Mercedes. And if you can get past yet another amazing Paisley shirt, Dad, after an immense amount of hard work and sacrifice, achieved that ambition. But unfortunately, one day he came downstairs, went into the garage to find the word Paki graffitied all over the garage, and someone had actually urinated on the car. The other memory I have about this car is our holidays. So I used to go back to school at the end of the summer and hear my friends talk to me about, oh, we went to Disneyland in Florida and we ate in all these restaurants. I remember thinking, can I actually tell them that what I did was there were 6 of us in a Mercedes touring Europe to go and visit our cha-cha. And actually, instead of the restaurants, we stood by the side of the motorway eating aloo puri out of a foil wrapper and drinking masala tea out of a tartan thermos. However, I was in a bubble. My parents never let me feel unsafe, and I was absolutely happy. I then moved to sixth form college, and that's when my real adult life began, and that's when I started to develop a racial awareness. There was a group of Asian kids, and they were only friends with other Asian children. And because of how I spoke, and because of the friends that I had and still have, they would refer to me as coconut or bounty. So brown on the outside, white on the inside, as if I was somehow betraying my skin color or not being true to my heritage. The text, so when I started socializing more, I would introduce myself as Neeraj Bhasin. The text there says, hello, my name is Neeraj. I've had knee rash, very commonly get Bashin or Basin as my surname. But the worst is when someone just says to you, you know what, that's too complicated. I'm just going to call you Bob. No, you're not. The other question I get asked is, where are you from? And I'll say, I'm from Huddersfield. They go, no, where are you really from? And I'll say, okay, I was born in Kent, but I moved to Huddersfield when I was a year old. And that's clearly not the answer they're looking for. After university in London, I moved back up to Huddersfield. And one of my first junior doctor jobs was in the accident and emergency department of this building. This is where I was assaulted by one of the patients because they didn't want to be treated by a Paki. I also remember doing ward rounds, and if I came across someone, because of our demographic locally, who couldn't speak English, and tried to speak to them in my broken Hindi to try and get a message across, to try and build some rapport, I remember my English colleagues being amazed that I could do this. But those colleagues who had joined us from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh actually sniggering and looking at each other, which brought me back to that coconut scenario. This is my father-in-law, and I've got an excellent relationship with my father-in-law. When I got engaged, he lived in Spain, and we went out to celebrate over there. And like a caring father would, he took his daughter to one side and asked her if she'd considered what it would be like culturally to be married to me. And that's an absolutely fair question for a caring father to ask. The other issue I encountered was that every grown-up that I'd ever met was just called uncle and auntie. Here's a gentleman who says, just call me Colin. I physically could not do that. When I had to, so my wife would say, go and ask dad if he wants a drink. I couldn't shout his name across the lounge. I had to try and get in his eye line and say, would you like a drink? Because it just wasn't right to use a grown-up's first name. This is a picture of me and my brother on what was clearly a very good night out. And I say this is a picture of me and my brother because I never really introduce him to people with his name. Number one, because he always has been and always will be Bhaiya to me. And number two, because our names rhyme. This is a source of great amusement to all our friends. And I have to just try and explain to them, it's just an Asian thing to have rhyming names. Eventually, after a number of exams and so on, I qualified as a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. And as you can imagine, there was a grand graduation ceremony. And I was aware that I should do something, but I was aware of the eyes on me. But knowing the sacrifices my parents had made, knowing the effort they put into getting me to this point, in the middle of this event with all those people around me, I made sure that I bent down and touched their feet to pay my respects and to receive their blessings, because that was more important than what people thought. However, it made me realize, and all of those events made me realize, that I didn't completely belong in England. So neither here. For the first time as an adult, I went to India, and that's when things got really interesting, because although I absolutely loved it, I didn't feel I fitted in there either. So my reality was, in terms of my belonging and identity, I did not feel complete belonging in England or India. So neither here nor there. So how do you get to all good? So these two you saw earlier grew up to be a corporate lawyer and a fast jet fighter pilot. And not that I identified them as role models back then, but they made me realize that there was nothing I couldn't do. There was no limits, and they removed that perception for me of a glass ceiling. Then things started to appear in popular culture that indicated that facets of my heritage may actually be cool and may actually be celebrated. Across university and college, people stood side by side with me. People made me feel that it didn't matter what I was, but accepted me for who I was. And for those who didn't, that was their problem. People gave me the confidence to walk into any room and be proud of myself, proud of my experiences, and proud of my diversity. At work, I felt I achieved due to being the right person and hitting the right standards. I did not feel that there was positive discrimination and that an organization was wanting to hit a target, because that's not where I'd want to be. I work for an organization, and still do, that builds confidence and positivity. I then met someone who took that pride and took that confidence and gelled it together and gave it a strength. Someone who embraced all that's good about sharing and blending those cultures and created a family of diversity. We have two boys who equally support Huddersfield Town as they do India cricket. My older one very much identifies as being Indian and is very proud of that. And we were on a walk recently with some English friends, and my friend said to him, so you've been at Grandma's this morning? And he went, no, I've been at Dadi Ji's. And he then took great pleasure in finite detail explaining how everyone in the family has a different name that relates to whether they're related to your mum or your dad, and they're older and they're younger. And he spent pretty much 3 miles of a walk going through this in detail to my friend. I was clearly very proud of that. The younger one very much feels he's English. But interestingly, when we filled out the recent census and we said, well, what religion do you want us to put you down for? And went through the options, he said, I'm Hindu. So is it perfect? No. I'm still conscious in certain situations, but I take the confidence, pride, and strength given to me by others, and I'll demonstrate behaviours that give those negative people absolutely nothing. So overall, I'm all good. These boys, they're as comfortable as cooking chapatis with Dadi Ji as they are cooking a roast with Grandma. So in sharing this story, I hope you feel seen. I hope this gives you confidence. I hope it gives you a feeling of pride and strength in your diversity. And I hope it helps us help those who come after us. Thank you.
Neeraj, thank you so much. It was great hearing that story again. And I've been sort of just jotting down things as you've been talking that I can completely and utterly relate to. But there seems to be people who are relating as well, who are watching. This idea of not wanting to smell of curry as a child getting on the school bus. The eternal "where are you really from" question. I think we can all completely identify with that one. And then Suman, who said I wrote a poem about this, and Rita, thank you for sharing, beautifully told. But for me, there was so much there. The sacrifice of the older generation, our parents, who sometimes had to give up on their dreams and their career aspirations, but then paved a life that was really good for us. The racism that they faced, which kind of pales a bit into insignificance when you compare it kind of with what we face sometimes. They had it a lot worse. Yes, we've got a long way to go, but they really, really did go through a lot. In fact, I was a bit of a posh Indian as well, because my parents, they came to the country with nothing, but they were both doctors and therefore did well for themselves. Bad dress sense. What's that about? I look back at those photos and go, what were they doing to me? But also this idea of a hidden self, that you've got that self that you have at home. Where I'm at home with my family, we used to eat with our hands every night, and celebrate that, and live in this culture. And then you go outside and you're completely different, and it's separate. And one of the really nice things about South Asian Heritage Month has been people sharing that in public, going, I'm proud, and this is who I am, and these are the clothes, these are our traditional clothes and our meals, and really putting stuff out there in a way that maybe people don't feel empowered to do. I was a coconut at university. I was shunned by people because I grew up in North Wales. I was one of the only brown people around, and when I went to uni, it wasn't natural for me just to hang out with other Asians. And I got targeted a little bit about that, which I didn't really understand at the time, and I found quite upsetting. But yeah, that coconut name has really stuck with me. And I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone about that before. It's just part of life. It's one of those things that happened. And the uncle and auntie comment, I mean, God, yes. Oh, my friends used to call their friends' parents. My friends' parents, they'd go, oh yeah, hi Sue and Dave, and I'd be like, oh, it feels really uncomfortable. I don't like it. And it really resonated as well when you said you went to India. And again, you don't quite feel like you fit in at home. And then I remember going to India, and we were walking through Calcutta Zoo, me and my brother, and we could understand what people were saying in Bengali. We understood, and they were saying, "Oh, someone should put them in a cage because we just looked so different." And we thought it was quite funny because we could understand it, but actually, you know, you don't quite fit anywhere. So, you know, and then all the way through to having two children. One who, you know, I've got one child who really, really identifies strongly with her Asian heritage, and the other one not so much. And it's just interesting. So thank you so much for sharing that. There's a few more comments that have come through for you. Wonderful story. It's so empowering to share stories. I completely agree with you, Suman. It really has, and I think that's kind of what's brought us together for this event. And thanks, Neeraj. I was not born here, neither in India, but I have been here long enough to feel empowered by all that you've said. That's lovely. And maybe we'll come back a little bit later to that sense of empowerment. I'm just going to do one more comment, and yeah, just read the book Empire Land. I know I'm still on the first few chapters of that. I need to get through it, but again, it's a brilliant book. Made me feel really proud of my Indian heritage. So I'm gonna bring Fatima in now. So Fatima, I know you don't have any slides for us, but I wonder if you can share in the same way that Neeraj did a little bit about your story, and tell us how it was for you growing up as a British Pakistani woman, because I think, you know, being brown but then also being a woman brings a lot of different aspects to it. So yeah, just tell us about your story. I'm just going to move the screen around a little bit. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Neeraj has said really resonates with me, like you described, Binita, but I also think there were some differences. I think the first is growing up in a Pakistani culture, particularly one that is of Pathan heritage, is really patriarchal, and there are certain expectations that we're brought up with. There are certain expectations to conform and be a certain way, and I sort of, one of the few things that really stayed with me, particularly as I was growing up, was this feeling of being invisible, not being seen, not being good enough, and no matter what I did, you know, I'd never be, you know, the same as my male siblings or my male counterparts, and that is still something I think that stays with me now as a fully grown adult and parent myself, and it really influences my parenting of my children. So I have a boy and a girl, and I very much make sure that they feel equal in the way that I parent them. But I think the other thing that is really important to sort of reflect on, particularly, you know, thinking about Neeraj's presentation, is how brave it is to stand on a platform and talk about this, because I think we don't always acknowledge that it comes with professional risk, but it also comes with personal risk. So there will be, you know, relatives that know my parents or community family members that'll be WhatsApping me afterwards going, I saw so-and-so talking about this and she said this, that we will have to deal with as a consequence. And, you know, that sometimes puts us off talking about this stuff. But if anything, it empowers me to talk about it even more and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think one of the things that I will always see as a theme growing up, and I think still really applies to a lot of the South Asian women that I've spoken to, is this sense of inner conflict. So we are brought up in our cultural homes to behave and act in a certain way, to not question, to not raise our voices, to not be emotional, to not have presence. And yet, when we go into the public sector, when we go to schools, when we go into work, we're encouraged to be the opposite. So my day job is to be a director. I need to hold my own in a boardroom. I need to hold people to account in my day job. But yet when I go into my private life and I'm hanging out with my relatives, that's not what they want to see, and they certainly don't want to experience it. So that inner conflict has stayed with me my whole life. I think the journey that I've been on is I've honed it and made it my own. So that inner conflict has made me ambitious. It's made me driven. It's made me vocal. It's made me embrace the good facets of me, and it really encouraged me to be a role model to young people like my own daughter, so that she doesn't think that is the norm and that isn't how she should be. But going back to growing up, I genuinely felt, because of that inner conflict, that I didn't fit in anywhere, and that I was being pulled in two different directions. So there was the Fatima that was at school, and there was the Fatima that went home that was completely different. And it did feel like I was fragmented into two different people. And I was pulled in two different directions. And I think, you talked about intersectionality. For me, there was a triple whammy. There was the fact I was a woman, or a young girl. There was the fact that I was a Pakistani Pathan woman. But there was also the fact that I was a Muslim. And there are certain things and certain boundaries that we don't cross. So, my friends were going out, they were hanging out at each other's houses, they were having boyfriends, they were drinking. And I saw all of this and this whole really attractive and tantalizing world, and I couldn't go there. I couldn't cross into that territory because, the mafia-like network of the South Asian community, wherever I went, was always present. And I was very cognizant of that. And I also was very bitter as a consequence of all these things that I felt as a young person. I was being denied. And it was only now that I look back on it as a parent of a daughter that I see that my parents were scared and they were trying to keep me safe and on the right path, whatever they thought that was. But what they didn't see was how it was life limiting for me when it came to my personal relationships, when it came to my academic progression, when it came to my professional career. Because networking is really important. Out of hours relationships are really important. Socializing is really important. And if you're restricted, particularly because of your heritage or your faith, that puts you at even more of a disadvantage, never mind because of the heritage or the color of your skin. And I remember sort of going to school in salwar kameez, and I'd wear my uniform and wear salwar kameez at school, and I was bullied. People would pick on me because although I wasn't as darker skinned as some of the very few colleagues I had at my high school, I was a very visible target, and I was really picked on and made to feel uncomfortable. But equally, that made me develop a skill set of being a chameleon. So, I adapted, and in different environments, even now, I change the way I speak, I change the way I behave, I change what I wear to blend in. Or you could argue to be invisible. I'll leave you with that question to reflect on. But what I also discovered on that journey of becoming that chameleon and to avoid being singled out or bullied was that I lost myself. So, there were so many different versions of me. I didn't know which one was the real me anymore. And then as I got older, I removed more and more of them and went more and more into myself and tried to conform to other people's expectations because I just wanted acceptance. I just wanted to belong to someone or something. And I really remember one of my teachers at school sitting me down at one point because she was a lovely woman and she somehow thought there was potential in me. And I remember her saying to me that you're never going to completely fit in with your Asian community. You've experienced that, that's obvious. You're never going to completely fit in with the Western community. Sad but true, because you're not one of them. So my advice to you would be to take the best of both and make that who you are. And that stayed with me. I was 14 when I heard it. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but it was a while ago. But that is something that I use as a mantra for the rest of my life. And, one of the things that then I started to explore, particularly as I went more and more into my career, was having that amalgamation of those different facets, making who I am. But I still had a way to go. And it's only been in the last couple of years where I've encountered role models from my workplace, from social media. Twitter has been a massive influence in my journey. And reaching out to these incredible women and sort of saying to them, how do you do it? How do you embrace it? And finding that commonality and finding that shared lived experience, which then empowered me to embrace my heritage. So I'm wearing salwar kameez right now, I don't know if you can see. But that's something that like 3 years ago I wouldn't have done. I went to an event in West Yorkshire fairly recently, and I went in salwar kameez. I was the only woman in salwar kameez in that room, but I owned it because I'm like, this is who I am, and I'm not apologizing for it anymore. And I think if I was going to give advice to anybody or sort of myself 15 years ago, I would just sort of say, hang on in there, it's okay, it's going to get better. I would signpost them or share, the role models that we've got right now. We've got role models in health and social care. We've got you, Binita. We've got, Perena. We've got so many people now that are emulating that you can be a really powerful, ambitious woman working in the 21st century and being all the things that as a child you were told not to do. And that is okay. And you can have a really good work-life blend of your heritage and professionalism, and you can be embraced for it. And I think that is a lesson I wish I'd learned a long time ago, because it would have saved me so much anguish. But the pro of it, because I'm always a glass half full kind of lady, is now as I look forward towards the young people in my life, I am showing them that it's totally okay to be part of both. So they, very much see me in both Western and Eastern attire. Their cuisine is very varied. It goes far beyond South Asian, Latina, Italian, whatever it is. And that they own their heritage, and it's very much part of who they are. And it's that integrated person that makes them multidimensional but okay. And I think that's a really, really important message, and why this South Asian Heritage Month is so important, because it will just reach more people that were struggling like me, to see that it is possible, and that there is hope for all of us.
Thank you, Fatima. I mean, there's a comment here, just, you're inspiring, Fatima, and I think you really are. I feel quite emotional actually hearing you talk, because the event's called Resolving Conflict, and gosh, there was just so much conflict that came out of your story there. Something that you said, that you had so many versions of you didn't know who you were anymore, and that's really powerful. And I think I just decided I was going to be this one version of myself, where I pretty much then let go of my Asian roots for a long time, because no one really tells you they're important, do they? A lot of it just attracts negativity. You don't learn about it in school. You don't learn any history of South Asia and Britain and why we're all here. And people don't sort of tell you to embrace it. They almost say, well, you're this, therefore you shouldn't do this. I remember my mum telling me when I was younger, I had two older brothers, and they taught me how to whistle, and she said, no, girls don't whistle. Just things like that. I mean, it's just you should behave in this certain way. And I was lucky that I was very much encouraged by my parents to do what I wanted. But a lot of what you said resonated with me, in that, as with being a girl and being a woman, and this stuff that you've said about the patriarchal world we live in. And I grew up in quite a traditional household as well, where my mum and dad were both doctors, but mum stayed at home, looked after the children, did all the shopping, did all the cooking. Dad went off to have a very illustrious career and got lots of accolades and all of that kind of stuff. Couldn't have done it without her, but she had to sacrifice a lot, and I don't think she really didn't get over that. Actually, she was quite bitter about that throughout her life. But it's and people, and other people have commented.
I was just going to say that. Sorry to interrupt you. It's hard, isn't it, on a virtual conversation? But my mum always reminds me about the fact that whenever her children did anything right, then it was down to the father. If they did anything wrong, it was down to the mother. And that is a theme I see very active in the South Asian community. And I was from a working class background. I lived in some of the most sort of deprived areas in South Yorkshire, but we were driven as a family because we were told that it doesn't matter if you're good enough. Because of our heritage, you have to be the best. And I think because that was instilled in all of us, don't think it was meant for me. I think it was meant for my siblings, but I heard it and I acted on it, and that kind of then backfired because of the gender that I happened to be born in.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up Chetan's comment as well. Oh God, I can see myself in your story, as I'm sure many can. Losing layers of ourselves makes more sense than somebody saying lose self-worth. And it's really nice kind of reflections coming in. So I think what I'm going to move on to now is just a bit more of a general discussion between the three of us. I want to talk about the impact on the next generation. So all three of us have talked about our kids, and I'm married to an white Irish man, so my kids have mixed heritage. And my fear is there'll be a point where the heritage, the Indian side of the heritage, is just completely diluted or gone, because there's me. I can understand Bengali, but I don't speak it particularly well. I don't speak it with the children. We don't speak it in the house. So that aspect, I teach them bits and pieces, but it's gone. They don't look particularly brown. They're a beautiful colour, but you wouldn't know they were Indian heritage. And how do we keep that heritage alive? And what do you think the impact is going to be on that next generation? Because my daughters do actually get some, minor racism by default because their mother is not white. It's nothing major, but it's there, definitely. And I'd like to come to you, Neeraj, about, what's your experience with your kids? How do you feel about how their identity is going to affect them?
So Fatima used the phrase best of both, and there's part of the reason I'm putting myself out there is to try and build confidence in others. I fortunately, as I described, got to a place where I feel all good. And there's two things, especially with my kids who are now mixed heritage. There's a TED talk by Jasser Aluwalia, and that's called he's got a hashtag which is both not half. So it's like I'm not half in. So for my kids, and I've made them watch it a number of times, it's I'm not half Indian and I'm not half English. I'm both, and it's a really, some may consider semantics, but it's not. They're not half. They're both, and so they've got. And then the best of both. There was an article by Sacha Darwin, I think, in the Independent, and again that used the phrase that Fatima did, best of both, and it's trying to get that across to them that you've got the ability to embrace, learn from, be, explore not just one facet, but you've got these whole two cultures you can learn from and draw from. And it's just trying to instill that confidence in them. And I'll give you an example from daily life that I sort of tell them. I know, as we've described, if an Auntie G comes into my clinic, I know, because of my diversity, which is my strength, I can relate to her with the equal compassion, rapport, etc., to when an elderly Yorkshire gentleman comes in and just goes, now then. And so for them, for the next generation, it's not about losing either, and it's not about being half. It's about fully being both, if that makes sense. So it's both, not half, and the best of both are those article and that TED talk that I'd absolutely encourage everyone to read, because that's how I'm going to try and approach it with my kids. Absolutely. We will go to Headingley in August and we will support India cricket. But the weekend before that, we'll be supporting Huddersfield Town, in the football. And so it's take the best of both.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's about instilling into them what kind of society doesn't, in a way that it's a really positive thing. It's something you should be really, really proud of. And it's kind of our job as parents to do that until everything else catches up, I think. Fatima, you kind of turned your inner conflict into incredible positivity. I'm sure that did take time and didn't happen overnight. How do you sort of deal with this in your children? Do you feel they are conflicted? What messages do you give them?
So I focus on trying to raise good humans. So I don't think about, they need to be good Asian people or good Western people or good Muslims. I'm just like, I just want them to have a stable home environment and a good mental health and well-being, because right now, if I get that right, that's a pretty epic achievement. What I try and do with my children is expose them to everything. So I embrace both the South Asian culture. So my daughter is an avid Bollywood fan. She loves the, not the new and latest films, but sort of the old 90s, zero noughties movies, the Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, all of that, Shah Rukh Khan movies. You know, and I don't emphasize that, oh, and this is better than this, or you need to think about this. I just expose her to it and let her absorb the bits that she wants. You know, and if there are things that she wants to talk about or explore, I try and listen and be objective, because I remember the things that used to trigger me as a child and the things that made me resentful or uncomfortable. And I'm very conscious of that. So I've never ever tried to coerce or push them in a certain direction. I really want them to make informed decisions and be healthy young people. But the thing I do, and it drives them nuts, is role models. If I see anyone from a South Asian heritage on the television, in a book, in the newspaper, I lose it. And I'm talking about how incredible it is and how positive it is and how we've got a role going forward in the future. You know, because I think it's really important that when they think about our heritage, that it's with a positive emotion and a positive connotation. So I think for me growing up particularly, it wasn't always positive. I got resentful quite a lot about some of the you know, responsibilities or expectations that come with being a South Asian woman, and I don't want my daughter to feel that way. So, you know, she embraces both, my son embraces both, and we try and avoid the patriarchal elements of our culture. And I do get a lot of grief about it. I do get a lot of feedback about it, and I respectfully say thanks for your advice, and I ignore it and carry on focusing on the way I want to raise my children. Because feedback's a gift, isn't it? So you can return it if you wish to. The other thing but the thing that I'd always sort of say to them is, you know, racism does exist. And this is a conversation that, you know, Neeraj and I have explored a lot with the work that we do with the Race Equality Network. And one of the things that really saddens me is, like you've described, Binita, my children have had racism, they've experienced racism, and it's heartbreaking. And I remember particularly, you know, the morning where the murder of George Floyd was shown on television, and I had to sit down and talk to my son about the fact that because he has an interesting name that might appear to be unusual, and because his skin color is slightly darker than mine, people are going to treat him differently. And that was a heartbreaking conversation I had to have with my little boy. And then I had a similar conversation with my daughter, but she's older, so she's already kind of aware of the concept. But we'd never really explored whether she'd experienced it, because in my naivety as a parent, I never thought my daughter would have experienced it at such a young age. But sadly, she did. And it wasn't overt. It's subtle, like you said, you know, it's just being made to feel different and not the same as everyone else, and not quite being sure why. So I think it's really important that we empower our children for the future, and we have these conversations, and we have this environment and culture where they feel comfortable to approach us and have those conversations, because that's how we're going to empower them to go into the world as you know, integrated people. I can't think of a better way of putting it, but also empowered with the skills and the resilience, sadly, that at the moment they're going to need as they become adults, but owning it, very much owning it.
Yeah, and I think I love that message of I'm just raising them to be good human beings, like, you know, and there's not putting that expectation that was on you onto them. And I think I'm very similar in that I almost just try and do all the things that I didn't really get growing up, you know, just in terms of sex education, talking about you know, drugs and alcohol and, you know, stuff, even though they're quite young. You know, my kids are only 10 and 8. We have really open conversations about all of that stuff. I've almost overcompensated, and I'm a bit too open and honest with them, I think, sometimes, because for me it was such a taboo. Like, no one ever talked to me about any of this stuff, and that's kind of how it is in South Asian households. And you know, you get wrapped up in cotton wool, don't you? I was the youngest of 3, and I was the only girl, and I was completely wrapped up in cotton wool. And then at the age of 18, it's like, off you go to Manchester University, and it was kind of like this, wow, real world stuff. I don't want them to have that. I want them to have some life skills before they get to university, to be honest. Or, you know, they might. Anyway, we won't go there. Right, just a few comments, and then Neeraj, I'll bring you in, because I know you've got you wanted to come back to some of the stuff Fatima was saying. But Zuman has said, my kids are so annoyed I didn't teach them Punjabi, but mine's terrible. Yeah, I totally get that. Oh, my Bengali's awful and it's embarrassing. And then, you know, it makes sense. The kids are 20 and 24 and they embrace both sides, but I had to learn to do it first. Yeah, you have to resolve that conflict yourself before you can teach your kids to do it. And then Rita's put a really interesting point that, you know, as a community, we don't have the allies in the media or publicly, and BLM has broken through because there was a moment, but not sure we have the same. And I think part of South Asian Heritage Month is trying to do exactly that, because part of the issue with South Asian communities is we haven't often spoken with one voice, because there still are a lot of divisions between different communities. But when you trace those divisions back, it kind of goes back to the British Empire and colonialism, so it's really relevant to talk about it. But Britain doesn't like talking about it because we've got a really difficult relationship with our past. And you know, when you get into this, it's really multi-layered and multi faceted. But yeah, I think part of what we're trying to do with South Asian Heritage Month is to change that and create a movement. And I think we've made a good start. We're only in our second year, and this is a long-term project. Neeraj, I know I didn't give you a chance to come back to Fatima's story. So any reflections on what she was saying?
Other than the obvious, which is that, you know, Fatima's just a shining role model for our race inequality network and for all of us really in the region, and, you know, massively proud to work alongside her. I mean, it was really about that best of both and both not half that you nicely covered anyway in the question about the next generation. And the other thing that I really identified, and although you said it was because of gender, it was that children are to be seen but not heard. So, you know, we would go to Uncle and Auntie's house and we'd sit in the corner quietly and obediently, and like you said, and you'd look out the window and there'd be kids running around and not being quiet and obedient, and you're thinking, why do I have to sit here in my cords in this hideous knitted jumper when all they're able to go and do that? And that, so like you say, that sort of be seen and not heard again it's a really interesting point, that when you get together and you're open and you can share those stories, it's hugely powerful, because it makes you not worry about it, makes you feel that actually it's okay because other people felt that. And the other thing again, but am I all good? It's that question of, is it perfect? And it isn't, because you were talking about going out and solve our kameez. Recently, we were fortunate enough to get together just around the time of Diwali. And so I went in a kurta and a sherwani, and I'd run out of petrol. I was running out of petrol. So as a family, and the boys were in kurtas, and Vic, my wife, had actually, I think, got changed because she was going on somewhere else. We stopped at the petrol station, and I did not have particularly the confidence to get out of the car and walk across the forecourt and pay for the petrol in that dress, like you've said. I didn't. And again, it's people like you that then give me the confidence. I didn't own that. I shied away from it. And it's a learning point for me that actually I shouldn't be, you know, if I'm on this stage where I'm privileged enough to be that, I need to learn from something as well. And I learn from, you know, if I am out going to a Indian ceremony, to absolutely own that outside of just my group that I feel comfortable within.
Not even that, Neeraj. When it's really hot and you're having a heat wave, you need to wear desi clothes. That's what they're designed for. The heat. Don't you think? Just from a practical perspective.
It's true.
Oh, and what is it about the knitted jumpers? I think, you know, we all got those, didn't we? Like, why? So that Anand's made a really valid and important point. You know, is the aim still quite limited? You know, we're talking about our you know, our good middle class kids who are all privileged, and is there a blind spot? Yeah, absolutely. Massive, Anand. And you know, this event was really, as Neeraj said at the start, it was just about our own experiences, and it really, we're not trying to generalize this to all South Asian communities by any means. We know there's some really hard-hitting problems, and we've covered that. We've covered some of those in our other events. So if you have a look at the whole events program, we haven't shied away from difficult topics. But what I would say is that the South Asian Heritage Month program is open to anybody. So if there was a topic or something that you really wanted to discuss, a bit like Neeraj emailed us, and here we are having an event about it, please do for next year get involved, and let's cover some of those more difficult and topics which maybe aren't as nice as this one. Happy to do that. I'm going to just bring us on to another question about the fact that we're all sat here at a certain age and stage of our lives, put it that way, middle age, and we
speak for yourself, Binita.
I'll put it out there. I am over 40. And it's taken me until I've got into my 40s to really embrace my heritage. And it took me taking part in a BBC One documentary and having this whole massive epiphany of rediscovering my roots and my family story to kind of get there. I know, Neeraj, you've talked about how it's taken you to get into later life to really resolve some of that conflict. Fatima, you've talked about the fact that you kind of owned it, but it took a long time to get there. I just wanted to explore that in a little bit more detail. Why is it that when we're younger we can't do that? Fatima, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, weirdly, I was talking about this with one of my best friends last night, and I think it's because in our culture, when you're young, you're not allowed to have opinions, you're not allowed to behave as a mature adult. And it's only when you get to a certain point in your life, and I think between us, we suspected it might be when your children are kind of teenagery age, that you're kind of perceived by your peers in the community as an actual adult whose opinions are valued, like an elder. That makes sense. Because I do remember sort of before marriage being perceived a certain way, after marriage being perceived similarly but slightly different. Then when I had my children, it kind of changed. But it was only when my children are older that now when I sit in a gathering, there are certain etiquettes and expectations that are, expected in accordance with our culture that people should behave towards me, which I found really fascinating. But the other thing we said as well was that 40 was the magic number, that you kind of get to a point where you think, I'm not 40 yet, but I'm nearly there. God, I'm 40 years old. I can't keep playing this game of worrying about what the community are going to say, or what Uncle G's going to say, or what Auntie G's going to say, or if someone sees me and drives and tells my mum, I'm nearly 40. But, and I think that's an epiphany that's happened to me and my friend fairly recently. So I do think it's a culmination of those things. But I also think it's just about lived experience as well, and the kind of circles in which you operate. So, we talked about conflict, and I think there is a point in all of our lives where we make a decision whether we need to break away or stay with our communities. And what I mean by that is, quite often because of our aspirations or ways in which we live our lives, we could very easily cut off from our communities and from our family. And if we choose to stay, that's difficult, and it comes with complications that we have to navigate. And I think for me, when you asked the question of how did I get to the point where I owned it, was because I consciously made the decision of, I'm not walking away from my community, I'm not walking away from my extended family. They're not quite what I'd like, and they're not completely I don't completely agree with everything that they say and that they do, but I do love them and I want a relationship with them, but it'll be on my terms. And I think that understanding and epiphany then led me to that I'm owning this and I'm not going to apologize for who I am. So in answer to your question, I think it was a culmination of all those things.
Yeah, and that thing about kind of almost not being treated like an adult really resonates as well, because my dad still calls us his kiddies. Like, my brother's in his 50s, we're still his kiddies. And my husband, who's from obviously completely different Irish culture, finds it really strange that that people who are our age can still be called kiddies by anybody. But that's kind of like it's just a just a cultural thing, isn't it? Neeraj, do you want to talk about your kind of transition to going from, being conflicted to being much more embracing of your dual heritage?
I mean, as Fatima said, it's a series of steps. It wasn't one day I woke up and went, I'm all right actually now. There is a risk that my mum and dad are on this if dad's managed to work out the technology. And I'm going to say I'm going to go out there and say, even though I'm 45, I still don't think I have a valid opinion in our home. So, and I was also the youngest of three, and in terms of being called kiddies, I am still called Chotu, so the little one, because I am the youngest. So,
I love that.
I mean, you know, so there's a few things. There was the fact that, you know, I took the decision to be a doctor, not because that was culturally expected. And that was really interesting, because when I decided that's what I wanted to do, that in itself was a challenge to my identity, because it was a case of, am I just doing this because, you know, it's sort of expected of me because my dad was a doctor and I'm, you know, and I'm Indian, so it's the sort of natural path, or am I doing this because I actually want to do it? So there was a sort of element of dealing with it at that stage. Our wedding, because we had one of each, it was, do you know what, I'm going to come in on a white horse with a dhol playing, and, you know, and all my friends loved it. It was those things of that, where you see allies, if you like, not looking at you and shying away, but your allies thinking, I want to be part of that. Like I said about the music, you know, and I know this sounds really sort of quite little, but that picture in my presentation was a group called Signature on Britain's Got Talent, who started doing Bhangra, and they blew they blew the roof off the place. And it's like, hold on, that there's people celebrating stuff that we do. Our wedding, the music, and then ultimately it got to a point, like you sort of referenced, where I think, do you know what? I don't really care anymore. This is who I am.
Yeah.
I'm not going to apologize. In fact, I'm not going to apologize for this. I'm proud of this. My diversity is a strength. It actually makes me better in some situations and in some other ways. So I don't care about it. This is who I am. I've had enough people accept that, and I'm all good.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I think you know, Rita has said here that she's been quietly seething about the lack of visibility of South Asian voices. You know, I'm so grateful we've done this whole program. It's really great to hear that, Rita. And I think you know, I think that group appearing on Britain's Got Talent is a really good start, because at least it's some visibility. But I think one thing I have certainly learned since getting involved in South Asian Heritage Month is, you know, those stereotypes are strong. And actually, we've been working with all these amazing sports women, you know, women who are football referees and play rugby and play football, and they're South Asian, and you know, who are mechanics and, you know, do all of these other roles. And you'd never see that on TV, would you? You'd never see, oh, the new mechanic in the soap opera is, you know, a Muslim woman. You just wouldn't. And so I think we've got a long way to go in terms of the representation. Yes, it's great we've got some now. There's not enough. We're the second biggest minority in the UK. 1 in 20 people in this country can trace their roots back to South Asia, and yet we're the least represented in media. And you know, so there's a lot of work to do. And I think as those role models and we get more visibility, then I think the conflicts in identity will hopefully reduce. So suddenly that's like an hour. I can't believe it. I thought we were going to definitely like cut it at 45 minutes because we'd have run out of all the things to say. But no, I'm going to sort of finish up. There's just a couple of more comments I want to put up. So, you know, Zuman, I love this too. My work as an artist is about the far-reaching fractures caused by partition. And yes, it absolutely affects every corner of the globe still, and very much in Britain. There are fractures, and a very big part of South Asian Heritage Month is trying to educate. So our strapline is celebrate, commemorate, educate. So the education part is a big part of what we're trying to do. And then kind of being able to live, thrive and succeed as your authentic self. That's the goal. And I think, Harris, that is a beautiful place to end. I would just like to say a massive thank you to Neeraj and to Fatima. You have both been absolutely amazing, and I'm so glad you didn't, you know, chicken out of this, even though there's temptations, wasn't there? So thank you for joining me for this chat, and you know, let's see what we can do for next year. Any final parting words from you both?
Just thank you, and just be confident and use your diversity as a strength, and help those who come after us build their confidence.
Brilliant message.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. You know, embrace who you are. Don't apologize for it.
Love that. Okay, and I think on that note, I'm going to say good night. We got another event in about half an hour, which is all about how we communicate with South Asian communities in the health service. It should be interesting. We've got a really great panel. So do join us if you've not had enough of us already this evening. And good night.